I'm Michael Burnheck. I'm from Tel Aviv University, and I'm honored to chair this session. So we have two elements or two components in the session, and there's been a slight change in the order. You can either as you said. Okay. The first element will be listening and talking with the young people, because this is all about young people's privacy. And then we have talks by Neil Selwyn and Sunny Kalev, and we will change the order because there are some constraints later on. So in the previous panel, we've discussed some elements of technology and some elements of policy making in a changing technological world or environment. And now it's time to move on and discuss the interaction of the above, of the law and the technology, with social norms and changing social norms and practices and perspectives. And for that, we have the subject matter of our discussion once again, which is the young people, and the wonderful initiative of the Victorian Office of the Information Commissioner and others who have joined. So first we have here Tricia Assibel, who's a policy officer at the Office of the Victorian Information Commissioner, who will introduce Yojuan and Gabby and some others who are not here but have participated. Right, and we'll take it on from there. So, Tricia, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Tamara, for the invitation.
Neil Selwyn, who is a professor in the Faculty of Education at Monash University, and Sunny Kalev, who is a PhD student at Tel Aviv University, just about to submit his dissertation. So as far as I'm concerned, he's already Dr. Sunny Kalev. But and we switch the order of the discussion here. Each of our speakers has approximately half an hour, so please leave some time for questions. So 20 minutes and 10 minutes or so. That will be appreciated. So Neil, please go first.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
It's not going to be as good as it looks. Anyway, it's lovely to be here. I'm really sorry that I've kind of stuffed up the narrative of this event, because I was meant to talk this afternoon. We've got a really good panel this afternoon. Thanks, Norman. Talking about education and the context of schools. And I was meant to be talking on that, and I've been hauled away this afternoon. So Norman and Moira very kindly put me in this session, which kind of stuffs up the running order. But I think I can kind of rationalise it. We've talked a lot about law, we've talked a lot about privacy, and now I guess Sunny and I are going to talk about contexts and move into context. So we've talked about family and friends and school. So hopefully, if you can bear with me, I'm going to talk about schools, and then Sunny's going to talk about childhood spaces, and then we can move into the afternoon thinking about education. So in particular, I just wanted to kind of introduce and set the scene for how privacy and data is done in schools. I do lots of research in schools. Now, I have to say two things. I feel like a massive outsider here. First of all, I say data and I say privacy, and everyone else has been using other words. But I'm also not a lawyer either, so I have no idea about law or privacy or regulation or any of these things. But I have been researching education and technology for 25 years now, and I'm really interested in how data in particular has become the primary kind of thing to be interested in if you're interested in how technology has been used in schools. So I wanted to talk about data in schools, hopefully just to raise some questions for this afternoon. And I want to talk about data about young people, personal data in a way, that's generated by and also mediated through digital technologies in schools. So a lot of the conversation so far has been about young people using technology, young people doing technology. Schools are a place where technology and data are done to young people. So some of these things might be slightly different to what we've talked about so far. Stick them all together, and I think we can have a really good discussion this afternoon. Now, first thing I should say, I mean, young people is not a homogenous category. So, every young person is different. We can't just lump them all together. And we can't do the same for schools either. A primary school is very different to a secondary school. A private school is very different to a Catholic school. A school in Melbourne is very different to a school in Montenegro or Montreal. So I'm going to talk about schools in a kind of homogenous way, but we do need to kind of disassemble this. And one size doesn't fit all to these discussions. But I'm fascinated about schools. This looks like a school, but It's also code space, as Kitchen and Dodge would call it. It's not just the physical building. There's a lot of software, there's a lot of code, there's a lot of data that make this a school now. So I just thought I'd start with 4 examples just to give you an idea of the scope of what we're talking about here. I've become fascinated by physical robots. I've just written a book about AI in education, but the publishers were very keen on the physical robot side of things. And I have become interested in how physical robots are being used in schools. Now, in a way, these are a kind of lost leader. Most of the automated AI in classrooms is software-based, but physical robots really make you think about what's going on here. And Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, there's a whole kind of sub-industry of using classroom robots. And they're really interesting what they're doing in terms of how data is being done to young people. So this is from the Komatsubara lab. Physical classroom robots. These have been around for a long time. They're often just like kind of walking video screens, but they also have video cameras in them, and they're trying to make sense of the young people that they're interacting with, and therefore personalise the learning towards the young person. And this particular last couple of years, they've become really interested in using robots to try and understand the young people that they're working with. So this robot interacts with children, it talks to them, video records their activities, and tries to identify their behaviour. And they reckon they've got 95% accuracy rate for identifying behaviour. Only 66% accuracy for identifying who the kids are, but, that's not a problem. But one of the things this robot's trying to do, you've got cameras all around the classroom, it's trying to identify high status, low status. Students that are popular, students that are not popular. And then it will work with the kids who are on the peripheries, the kids who are being isolated, possibly being bullied, not socially interacting. And they reckon 71.4% accuracy in terms of identifying isolation in the classroom. So it's fantastic. You're a teacher, you've got 30 kids, and the one kid that's not being looked after, the robot can pay attention to. Not a problem. Coming back to Melbourne, another hassle for teachers is taking the roll call. Who's in the class? Often you get it wrong. Facial recognition is possibly the way forward. So again, this is quite a simple system. One camera and scans the class and will tell you who's in the class. So it does the roll call for you. And the marketing in 2.5 hours a week of teacher time is saved. Very concerned about privacy, as you can see from the diagram on the side. School's private cloud, and then magic happens. So that's not a problem. But schools are a really interesting place for facial recognition technology to take hold. They already have a photographic database with ID information, and they also have a system of cameras in place. Schools have had CCTV for a long, long time. So Andrew, I guess, is going to talk this afternoon. Some of the schools in the UK have 140 cameras. Some of the schools in the UK have cameras in the toilets. So that's bad news for our panel before. Cameras are in schools. So facial recognition software like this is no problem at all. And it's not just for taking the class role either. These systems are also used to detect emotion and behaviour and engagement, just to see how students, which one of you is bored? Possibly Moira, so I'm going to start looking at her. But the camera's telling me this. So this software can be really useful for teachers in a hurry, getting information about who their students are. But how are your students feeling? So again, bad news for the panel before. We do monitor your social media. This is Social Sentinel, which is used for a lot of schools. Very, very popular software in the States. Scans the social media streams of students looking for threats, either to yourself or to others, self-harm or harm to others, and picking up slight problematic cases. And in the wake of the school shooting over the past 10 years, this software is being used more and more in the States. Also something like Gaggle. Their catchphrase is "Gaggle has your back." I'm not sure whose back they actually have, but this scans emails that are sent on school systems. It scans anything done on the school learning management system, Google Docs, also calendar entries made in Microsoft Office. And then when it flags up slight issues, a human comes in and reviews the cases. And they claim between July and December 2018, they found 51,000 examples of questionable content, which was mainly bullying or sexual content, occasionally self-harm, and very, very occasionally threats of violence to others. But again, a useful way of actually monitoring what's going on in a school. And then you may have seen this was just introduced last month. Florida, in the wake of the Parkland school shooting, created a mass database looking for potential school shooters. And they basically put together all the databases that were already existing on young people and students to try and get a profile of predictory cases before they happened. So they put together the records of any records of kids that had been bullied. disciplinary and behavioural incidents at school, anyone that had been diagnosed and treated to be a substance abuser, anyone found guilty of committing a crime, people mentioned in reports of suspicious activity to law enforcement, and then also records of involuntary psychiatric examinations and foster care placements. So 9 million kids are in foster care in Florida, and they were on the database. So all this data was put together, and they now have a good register of people they need to be watching, which again, I don't want school shootings to happen, so I'm not saying this is a bad thing. But you can see how schools and data are not just kids on Facebook or schools using data to see who's coming top of the class. We're in a completely different sphere now. This is in compulsory education. Higher education, I think Carla's going to talk about, again, is very datafied. And if you think about a school classroom, this might look like a classroom from the 19th century. You've got a desk and you've got a teacher at the front and a board, but it's stuffed full of digital devices. It's stuffed full of sensors. It's stuffed full of software. Data is being generated continuously by these digital technologies. And this is what we're interested in terms of how digital and data are now coming together. Now, I should say, first of all, the logics to all of those things I've just described are not new. They're not caused by technology. Teachers have always looked for kids that have been bullied. We've always tried to stop kids that are going to harm themselves or possibly cause harm to others. So these are offline logics that are writ large throughout contemporary schooling. And the technology, in a way, is finding a home within that milieu. And there is also some kind of awful offline examples. This is the Sandy Hook Promise you may have seen that's come out this month. A foundation trying to get young kids to tick off a checklist and report any of their peers or friends that they see displaying any of these activities. Extreme prolonged sadness. I think I might count for that. Hopelessness about the future. And this is a piece of paper that's been given out to kids in the States. So I'm not saying this is a digital problem and we just need to get rid of the technology, but technology amplifies this because data like this, when digitized, can be circulated, recirculated, combined, and takes on a kind of an amplified life of its own. So this is why the digital data is of particular interest to me. So there's explicitly generated data that schools have always taken, attendances, grades, performance, but then also there's this trace data, what Mel Gregg calls digital exhaust, the incidental traces that are attached to swipes and clicks and any movements online, all producing mineable profiles of students, behavioural insights, and on a continuous basis. And so schools, in a way, this school here is caught up in a number of turns that contemporary society has. The turn towards data science and analytics and big data, the turn towards smart institutions and the Internet of Things, and also the turn to the data economy or surveillance capitalism, as Shoshana Zuboff has popularised it. And it's really interesting to see how schools are kind of tapping into or being tapped into along these lines. So in terms of data science and analytics, this is now a big thing in universities and a big thing in schools. Learning analytics, education data mining. We're now told that the data generated by the digital systems and the digital devices can give us untold insights into learning and learners, their behaviours, their emotions, and hopefully prompt their decision making. So it's really interesting now, control in schools has shifted from kind of disciplinary control, controlling bodies, to anticipatory control of behaviour. So the idea of using data in schools now is to try and see what students are doing learning-wise and try and nudge them in a kind of behavioural economics way to doing better things or right things. So we've got these personalised learning systems now that will track everything that you do online as a learner and then suggest what you do next. So one of the big systems, Newton, claims to have 1 million data points per student and claims to know a student far better than any teacher ever can. That's great, because I haven't got time to get to know 30 people, so I'd rather a machine learns you, and brilliant, everyone's a winner. So it's really interesting, and also emotions and affect are really, really important. It's not just about are you getting the right answer, it's about how are you feeling and how can we perhaps nudge your emotions, your confidence, your motivations, your enthusiasms in the right direction to make you learn better. All good. I say that in a kind of not good way. There's also lots of things about smart buildings, sentient schools, allowing data to actually kind of allow schools to operate more efficiently, and of course security and data valence, all the stuff I was talking about before. Monitoring access to schools, monitoring movements around schools, monitoring attendance, monitoring intentions. What's interesting about all of these datafication, as we call it in the social sciences, is how a lot of it is implicit. Schools are not necessarily aware of this or don't necessarily think about it. Students don't necessarily think about these things. Teachers, it's just part of the water now that we swim in when we educate. So schools are platformatized. They have big learning management systems, school information systems, Google Classroom Suite. So everything that goes on in a classroom goes through these platforms. And again, these are big sites of data generation and data analysis. We also have kids bringing in devices, teachers bringing in devices, teachers installing apps. I could have brought in a little quiz app to make this session a bit more funky. I didn't have to tell Norman about it, wouldn't have to tell the IT administrator, but that app would be used in a classroom generating data. So there's a whole kind of wild west of app use and then social media use. So schools are really data intensive places. They're supposed to be, and they're under great pressure to be data driven, but they're also data disengaged. Half the time, this isn't really recognised as an issue. So it's fascinating, but also quite scary space to be working in. So there's lots of hopes and fears that I think we need to be aware of. I wouldn't say I'm going to theorise this. I might just point to some ideas, but there are lots of hopes, and I don't want to be a kind of naysayer. Data can be good. Digital technologies can be useful. These insights can be fantastic. So there's a lot of hope behind when Dave Beer writes about the data gaze, this idea that we can have speedy, accessible, revealing, panoramic, prophetic and smart ways of knowing and acting in schools, where actually we don't have a lot of time to know and act. So there's a big push in education for more precise insights, for participatory, anticipatory, predictive insights, and just knowing more about what's going on can't be a bad thing. When you look at the fears about data and education, I agree with them, but they're not as extensive as I would like them to be. And what I wanted to do is actually talk about what else we should be worried about. Most of the concerns in the critical data field, critical data studies field, is about reductionism. I mean, this is a quote from Jathan Sadowski, but he's kind of describing here what datafication is, the process of making data by reducing and turning things into data. Abstraction is the process of simplifying a thing by stripping it of context and focusing only on specific qualities. Now, in education, when things are reduced, the concerns of critical education research is, well, we're reducing a whole bunch of stuff about who people actually are, who students actually are. Are there enough data points to actually properly understand who a person is, how they're feeling, how they're learning, everything else that's going on in their lives? So it's really interesting that the data points that get used as proxies for educational variables. And that's one of the big concerns. There are also a few concerns over performativity. Stephen Ball talks about the terrors of performativity for teachers, because it's not me just finding out about my class. This data is also of great interest to my boss, who wants to know how I'm teaching. So teachers are also held to account by this data, and therefore act in ways that are data-driven and data-led. I want to make sure my data looks good, so I'm going to make sure that I'm really nice to you, so you're super enthusiastic, and then you peak on the meter. And there are also a few concerns about ethics, fairness, accountability, transparency, all of which I agree with. But I think there are other things we need to be concerned about, and hopefully this is where this tips into some of your interests as privacy experts, and maybe ethics, maybe morals. There are some wider things I think I want to be talking about here. So my own concerns are more around the lines of how does digital data set the conditions and the parameters and expectations of everyday life in the school, altering the character and the conditions of the school. I think the character and conditions of schooling are very different now, given everything I've just described. What are the values of the way that data are being used? In what ways are data ideological? What ideas, values, ideals are they conveying? And what's not being conveyed? And I'm really interested in terms of the shifts in power, in terms of the capacity to do data as opposed to the capacity to have data done to oneself. And also the agency, if you want to call it that, of our algorithms. A robot is not actually deciding how happy I am. It's an algorithm. It's a programmed software in a machine. And also the social, political, cultural consequences. What is this actually leading to? And how could things be otherwise? So these are the questions I think we should be asking from a sociological point of view. I'm sure from a legal point of view, there are some more specific things you want to be talking about. But if you look at these questions and then look again at the things I showed you at the beginning of the talk, I think there's a whole bunch of stuff we need to be talking about here that are perhaps not being talked about enough. So, I mean, the Florida data thing is clearly not, is more problematic than it's probably being perceived. And this was something that Sven said at a previous talk, I saw him talk, and he may have said it before today. All of this seems very mundane on its own. But you put all those data sets together, and suddenly there's a tipping point where all of a sudden it's not so good to have collected data on who identifies as LGBTQI, for example, or which kids are disabled, or which kids are bullied. Because when you combine them together in the Florida data set, they suddenly become something else. So there's a kind of a constellation or an effect of putting lots of different data sets together, and then it tips over. So I think that's something that's interesting. The inadequate nature of informed consent as well. You cannot opt out of facial recognition classroom identification. If one kid opts out, the whole system doesn't work. You can't opt out of learning analytics. Well, you can at the moment, and there's a really interesting discussion in the learning analytics field to say we need to make sure that everyone can't opt out. So they're arguing now, as soon as you accept a place into university, you're opting into learning analytics. And if you don't want to use the learning analytics, don't come to university, which is a really interesting slip. Anyway, in terms of gaggle, I mean, monitoring social media, to what extent are public posts? I know we said earlier that if it's been made public, it kind of infers you don't mind what's being done with it. But did you really want it to be mined in terms of your harm to the school? I also think I have a right to know if a robot is silently calculating my social status. I'm not sure I want to know exactly what it thinks I am, but you need to have a right to know that's what it's doing, and then possibly a right to know what it's saying. And I also think there's some really interesting issues here about mental privacy, or what's sometimes called cognitive liberty. How I'm feeling is an incredibly private thing. Should that be made publicly available, publicly accessible? Should that be something that teachers then act upon? I think there is a possible right to mental privacy. So all of this emotional, affective, even the neurological stuff is of interesting. And the other thing that really interests me about, say, the facial recognition is the end to a right to obscurity. I loved being in school and going under the radar, being a wallflower, being at the back, not really coming under, because that's how I thrived. Now there's no escape. My teacher will know exactly where I am, how I'm feeling, how I'm tracking. Now, for me, I was all right. I quite enjoyed it. Clearly, you do want to see if some students are isolated. It's not always a good thing, but it's not always a bad thing. There's a big dehumanizing effect as well, I think, in terms of facial recognition, reducing me to my 70 points on my face. I think this is where I turn into a bit of a hippie, but I think as a human, if I detect a glimmer of hope in Norman's face or a little wry smile, would a system be able to kind of detect that and necessarily pick up on those nuances? And the flip side to that, and I think the tragic comic effect of all of these facial detection software, is we're going to have to contort our faces into shapes that the system recognises. I am happy, I am learning, and that's not a good thing either. I joke about it, but there's some interesting stuff about speech recognition software and teachers having to say things they know the system will actually react to. And then when we have automated essay grading, students being coached to write in a way that the computer actually recognises and gives them marks. So you end up just writing this very formulaic stuff, because that's what gets you grades. Two other things I think I'm also interested in, because Mark Andrejevic and Faith Gordon and Liz Campbell and I are working on facial recognitions in school at the moment, and there's some real interesting stuff there about oppression. These are surveillance, we talked earlier about nice surveillance and not so nice. Surveillance is oppressive. I surveil you to control you. You might think that's benign or not, but it's always oppressive. And one of the things that facial recognition does is foreground attributions of race and gender. These systems will always calculate your race and your gender. Why is race suddenly now a more important variable in terms of education, whereas before it may not have been? And last of all, these systems making schools more authoritarian. If schools weren't authoritarian, these technologies would make them slightly more authoritarian, but schools are by nature authoritarian. And this is amplified, I think, by these technologies. So let's regulate the hell out of these technologies. Let's bring in some laws. Why don't we do that? Well, I don't think we can very easily. I'm sure you all know this already, but this is the Future of Privacy Forum, who've done some really good stuff on schools and why you can't just regulate these technologies, because lots of people want them and they can do some good. Data is not all bad. I want to prevent school shootings. One of the things that the Future Privacy Forum report from April pointed out was that there is a big proportion of teachers and parents and the public who want school safety and school security. If you can bring a system in to stop school shootings, people are going to want that. So if you try and regulate against it, there's going to be pushback. I've had pushback from teachers talking about the classroom register system. I've been saying, well, this is insane. And they go, no, it's really good. I want this. Shut up. I have to do this every day. So there is a lot of demand for these things. But the FPF also talk about the unintended restriction of benign activities. If you start acting in a broad manner and regulating data in a broad manner, you run the risk of inadvertently curtailing the activities of benign actors in schools. If you curtail biometric information, for example, all of a sudden you can't be a class photographer taking photographs of people and giving out class yearbooks, for example. You might ban the sale of, if you ban the sale of student data, that might include student data and transcripts that's sent to universities. You may not even allow academic researchers to come in and generate data on students, which would be awful, because I want to do that, so don't regulate it too much. And also there are unintended consequences for increased parental rights. If you allow a lot of parental opt-out, again, it can curtail some beneficial uses of student data in terms of what schools can do with the data, and even things like printing newsletters or yearbooks, again. So again, there are things you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't know how you regulate for this or how you legislate for this, but I'm sure that's what you're going to sort out this afternoon. So I guess just to finish with, schools are a mass, there's a mass of school data. And there's also a mess of school data. It is a bit of a mess. There have been some robust responses. So the facial recognition thing, Loop Learn, the Department of Education in Victoria actually pushed back and has put a whole bunch of hurdles now that government schools have to go through to get these systems in place, including doing proper privacy audits, getting parental consent, etc., etc. But it's a bit of a mess because independent schools and Catholic schools are not covered by that legislation. At the same time the Victorian government were banning or trying to ban it, the Federal Department of Innovation gave them £500,000 of startup funding because it was such an innovation. So there's some interesting regulatory blurring here. It's also a mess because I think schools have got lots of stuff on their plate. They don't necessarily do data. They're not necessarily on top of these things. Sometimes there's a willful misunderstanding of what privacy is or what freedom of information is, and it's used as a kind of excuse not to do anything. And data is also overseen by a very limited number of staff. It's not everyone's responsibility. And also school use of these digital devices is completely devolved. The government here tried to have a very centralised system about 10 years ago called Ultranet. It completely blew up, and now it's gone the other way. It's a bit of a wild west. Schools are left to their own devices, literally, to get in software, to get in platforms, and there's a massive mess of apps and platforms being used. I'm really heartened, actually, in Australia. It's not as bad as the US. It's not as bad as the UK. Schools here are actually pretty cleary at the moment on pushing back on some stuff. Not every classroom's got facial recognition in it. Not every classroom is monitoring social media. My worry is that schools are ripe, because of just the lack of time to think about these things, to be exploited by commercial interests. And I think there is you can already see it, there's an ease to the way that some of these data solutions are sold to schools. There's an ease to which schools can give data away. And there's an ease to which these technologies fit within the politics of what schools are. Schools are about control and are about discipline and are about monitoring. So I think it's not inevitable, but there's a kind of, it's shifting ground. And I'm really worried that schools are a kind of soft site for what are actually quite dangerous technologies. These are kind of privacy loss leaders. Once you get facial recognition in as a visitor management system in a school, people get used to it. It then goes to the classroom. It then goes to the wider community, and then we have it everywhere. And I'm not saying facial recognition is a bad technology. I am saying facial recognition is bad technology, but I'm saying we need to think carefully. And schools and hospitals and some of these other public sites are places where this stuff can kind of slip in under the radar. So, clearly an important thing to be discussing properly. I'm really glad I can't be here this afternoon to actually come up with any answers, but I think we're talking in the right space. So schools, really important, but also families and friends as well. So put the two together, we may get somewhere.
Thank you so much.
No worries.
So we do have a few minutes for Q&A.
Normally when there are no questions, it means I've been super comprehensive and you're convinced, or you're already bored. But
that's good. Thank you for that talk. That was excellent, really interesting. I'm just wondering, there seems to be a movement in schools, or schools that are increasingly using this technology from, once upon a time, students were surveilled by others, then obviously part of that was an encouragement in self-surveillance. There's a sort of movement towards simulation and prediction. And my suspicion is it's actually going to direct intervention through the technology. So almost like what Facebook is doing in wider society. Now, I just wonder if you have a view as to sort of if that's a pathway you see that. I mean, certainly there's simulation there, but I actually think they're further down the road than that.
Yeah, I think schools have always been places of discipline and control, and I think it's shifting from a kind of control of bodies and a disciplining, making sure you're in the classroom learning, to actually this, as I said, anticipatory control. So it's all about future-looking, influencing future behaviours and future decision-making in a very individualised way. So that's another one of these kind of logics that's come into schools now, that it's an individual project. You are a learner learning for yourself, and you must go on your own right learning pathway. It's all about getting kids through the system and getting them performing well. So there's the individualization is very, very interesting as well, because there is a kind of self-responsibilization of risk. If you do well, it's because you've chosen the right things and you've made the right decisions and been pushed in the right way. But also if you fail, it's your fault. And that is, I guess, a worrying, when I said what's stripping away from the character of schools, one of the worries I have is that the nature of public schooling is a collective, communal activity. Schooling is a public good. The idea of what public education actually means, that's kind of being stripped away by the technology to being very individualised and very future-looking. So we're trying to work with schools now about how to make different use of data. And one of the things we're trying to get them to do is look historically at what has happened. And it's really interesting that there's a big pushback. Why would we do that? That's already happened. We can't control that. We want to know what's coming up in the future. So the technology and also the politics of education are pushing schools to be very forward-thinking. Students, as you say, it's been very individualised. And again, you're thinking about the pathway that you're on or the journey that you're on. And this idea of anticipatory control and the idea of kind of predicting where you're going and then seeing whether we can nudge you into a better place is a dominant mindset, which I think, again, just changed the nature of what schools are. Schools didn't used to always be like that.
So I would say that in addition to this neoliberal kind of move, there's also intermediation. It used to be teacher and student, or school and student, and now it's a school, student, and a technology company which takes the data and probably wants to use it for other purposes as well. Whether they do or not is something else. But
they do. Yeah. So some of the facial recognition stuff that's come into schools is being introduced by companies that 3 or 4 years ago had photo sharing websites for schools, allowed kids to upload photos and share them, and videos. So I wonder how they train their data sets to get children's faces. So the educational data is incredibly lucrative. Health data, financial data, and education data. If you can actually model how learning takes place, that's a very profitable thing to do. So they don't target adverts to students using these things necessarily, but the data is very, very profitable. And there is this intermediary. And what's interesting from an educational, this is going to bore the lawyers, but the pedagogy of the classroom is being written by the software company. If I'm using Kahoot, for example, which is a very popular quiz show, the pedagogy of my classroom is being scripted by Kahoot, not by me, not by my boss, and not by the department. And that's a shift. Sometimes a good thing, because I could be a terrible teacher, or it can be, necessarily a deprofessionalisation of what teachers are all about.
I've got a question, and it's really reprising an earlier one. If we can't regulate it, what role do you think procurement has in this area?
I think we need to encourage people to talk about this and to be aware of this, first off. I don't know if we can't regulate it. I wouldn't say that's for you to decide. But certainly making it more apparent and making it part of the conversation is really, really important. And one would hope that would then shift schools into talking about procurement perhaps in an ethical way or perhaps in a more moral way. I'm quite a big fan of collective procurement. If groups of schools get together and talk about what they want to procure on a group collective basis, A, they can get it cheaper, but B, they might have some of these discussions. What one school wants to do, another school might have some very good reasons why that's not a good idea. So clearly procurement's interesting, but it's not an answer because, as I said before, I can procure anything I want as a school leader. My teachers are bringing in all sorts of stuff under the radar. So there's this kind of shadow market. And often teachers are getting the apps on Google Play that are in the top 10 and that are free. So the procurements, in some ways we need to have a bottom-up shift as well in terms of teachers being quite aware. And so the Future of Privacy Forum, they have a really great checklist for teachers. If you're bringing an app into the classroom, here are 10 things you need to actually think about. First of all, where's the data going?
Although I would say that the FDF works in the US and there are hardly any privacy laws there. So they sort of fill the void or have to fill the void with bottom-up sort of rather than a top-down requirement.
But there are better privacy laws here. I'm looking at Sven here. But teachers are still bringing in anything they want because you can't really regulate this as a teacher.
Okay. So thank you once again Dale, for your talk. And thank you. And just on time to move to Sunny and privacy spaces, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. I see Neil's gone. Such a great talk, and I think that I will take it up a notch. And from the point of view, you talked about education. I'm going to talk about other childhood spaces. But I'm a PhD student at Tel Aviv University. My supervisor is Professor Michael, the great Professor Michael Biernack that sits here. I'd like to discuss the minimization of children's privacy, private space in the digital age. And in a nutshell, the main argument I want to argue is that we are witnessing the collapse of the distinction or boundaries between childhood spaces, which in the future will make it difficult for children to find private space and privacy. And if we think that privacy is important for children, then we're facing a problem and we need something to do. Lawyers, educators, teachers, all of us, regulators, of course. I want to talk about the four main spaces: the home sphere, the educational sphere, the public sphere, and the virtual, the online world. And I will describe the phenomena of the minimization of the children's private space and how it affects their privacy, and in the end discuss the role of the law regarding that. But first of all, I want to introduce to you to 16-year-old Blake Robbins, if you know him. In 2010, Blake filed a lawsuit against his school district in the US for privacy violation. He claimed that the school used the laptop camera that from the computer it provides him, the school's computer, to take hundreds of pictures of him in his home, in his private room, of course without his knowledge or consent. The matter came to light when the assistant principal accused them that he was acting like he's using drugs at home. So he started thinking, hey, why did you think that? And then he noticed that the light of the camera was on and off, and he filed a lawsuit, and the school officials acknowledged that the school had seized thousands of images of some students and screenshot from their computers. Again, it's the school's computer, right? I mean, yeah, we're talking about property, it's the school's property. But argued that they did that to find lost computers. You know, they didn't try to track the kid, just tried to find the lost computers. So, this is a photo of him sleeping, post with the permission of Robbins' attorneys, and the lawsuit, as you see, ended with compromise the school district to pay Robbins this amount. And this is an extreme example, but it emphasized my argument that I want to present here, that regarding the minimization of children's privacy or private space and the collapse of boundaries, and that's the real issue, the collapse of boundaries between those spaces. And those boundaries gave children in the past, maybe still in the present, the opportunity to find the private space. And when we see the collapse of boundaries, then it will be harder and harder to find a private space. Okay, so what are the four? There is, you say, the home sphere, the educational sphere, the public sphere, and the virtual sphere. And this is, by the way, Roger Hart, if you know him. But so what you can see here, I'm going to show you in a minute, that as a result of the growing use of information technologies at every sphere, at home, at schools, and etc., and the fast data transfer between those spheres, so that's the reason why we see this minimization of children's private sphere. And to take the Hart quote here, I would like to argue that in the digital age, children as a group are one of the most technologically monitored group, but at the same time have little control about their privacy. And we heard the children before, and they're not children anymore, but they're saying they want control, right? And we see that the future is not looking bright from that perspective. Okay, so let's enter each sphere. And here we can see a table and like who are the offending sides and what are the use, right? I'm talking about now in the home sphere. So first of all, parents. We didn't talk about a lot of parents until now, but inside the home, parents are a big major factor. So what do parents do? Well, they search children's digital device. Yeah, it's like snooping, right? Enter his phone, seeing his text, what he's reading. They can use home surveillance camera, CCTV. They can monitor children using the IoT devices. You know, if I have a refrigerator who knows when the kids open and what he took, I know he ate chocolate in the afternoon. I don't need to ask him anymore. I knew you ate the chocolate. You can't lie to me anymore. I'm a dad. I have 3 kids. I know it's a problem. But again, and of course, sharing, okay? Disclose information about you on social media. From the home sphere, from the family sphere, we can take it outside, right? So I'm going to address that in a minute. So that's the parents. State authorities, that's the example of the schools using the computer inside the home of Blake Robbins. Okay, that's one example. Who knows, we can think about more. Private corporations, of course, smart toys. Yeah, I'm going to show you pictures in a minute, but smart toys are very cool, very nice, children like it. Yeah, a private corporation can collect data and sensitive data using those smart toys. And of course, those IoTs that parents can use, also the private corporation who, you know, operate those IoT devices. And of course, criminal parties, I'm not going to talk about them a lot, but they can take over the CCTV, they can take over the IoT device, and it's all inside, as we know, the home sphere. This is a research from, it's already old, but you can see here that 48% of American parents admitted looking at their children phone cells, messages, etc., the snooping tool. I think now the numbers are higher, and yeah, also in Israel, by the way. But here is an example from Israel commercial. This is a very famous guy, believe it or not, in Israel. And the commercial, private company, wants to sell parents CCTV cameras and smart homes. How did he do it? He's going on a vacation to Greece. He says to his kids, don't have parties, you know, we have, several stuff. To say, yeah, go, don't worry. And he's sitting on the beach in Greece and sees his kids having parties, you know, oh my God, and talks to them through the CCTV. And that's the way they sell to parents. You need smart homes, because who knows what your kids are doing when you're not at home. Mark Zuckerberg, which is like the cow who doesn't end of giving. I don't know if I said it in English, but you know, you understand me? I said to my spouse, everything I need, just enter Mark Zuckerberg's, I don't know, so it gives us everything. So he talked about AI inside his home and said, here, I will teach it, the AI, to let me know if anything is going on in Max's room, Max is his daughter, that I need to check on when I'm not with her. I mean, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. It is good. Yeah. So we can see parents use this technology to monitor kids at their homes. But talked about private cooperation. Yeah, so here's the Hello Barbie. A very cool device. She talks to kids saying, what's your name, what's your favorite movie, etc., etc. Collects a lot of sensitive data. Also, by the way, cameras. You know, and again, in the private room, small kids. This is for small kids. Let's talk about Echo Dot, Amazon. You know, one of the big 5, right? Amazon. And those are devices that are built for kids. I mean, it's not Alexa. You can talk about Alexa also. But this is for kids. Put it in your room and you can like talk with it and whatever. So a lot of sensitive data is being collected there. So Yeah, so I think that it's well, this is another example. I don't know if you heard about it. It's pretty new that Microsoft said humans no longer listen to Xbox One voice recording. Yeah, and you see all those companies that said, yeah, human did use and listen to what happens in your home. And Xbox, I mean, come on, we know kids. They are playing Xbox, which is perfectly fine. Someone was listening to them while they were doing it in their home. And when I said about, people talking about my private room, I said, private room, really? Let's think about that concept for a bit. Okay, so Sharenting. Okay, so Sharenting, this is Gwyneth Paltrow, very famous thing. She uploaded her picture. Mom, we have discussed this. You may not post anything without my consent. Her daughter is over there, Apple Martin, and she answered it. You can't even see your face. Clearly, she didn't really understand what her daughter was trying to tell her. But that's, that what happens when you share information. This is from, again, the home sphere. This boy, his mother wrote it on the top there. He heard about the news about what happened in Ferguson and got all excited. Ferguson, the U.S., the shooting, the white officer shooting the black people, the black person, sorry, and the court saying the officer is not guilty or whatever. So the kid is very happy. He's put his his little cup. And his mom is so excited, so she uploaded it to the net. And by the way, in her photo, the line weren't there. I mean, though it's here now, it wasn't there before. So talking about again, and of course those pictures really don't understand. This is from from Britain, Children Commissioner from 2018. On average, by the age of 13, parents have posted 1,300 photos and videos of their child on social media. Those are big numbers, and you can see all sides of data here. Okay, so that was the home sphere. Educational sphere, very easy job for me now because Neil talked about it so perfectly. So I just need to say, take everything Neil said and let's move on, because that's what happened there. Of course, you have the CCTV, you have biometric data. By the way, there is a case in the US, 2013, when a child filed a lawsuit against the RFID chip. She said she don't want to wear it because of religious issues. The court said it was legal. And you can see some examples here, but again, Neil talked about it. I don't want to add. I just want to say, and this is in China, the facial recognition thing. This is in Israel. I don't know if it happens here in Australia or whatever, but in the US or Britain, I don't know. But today, there are systems that upload data recording what happens in the school, if the kid is late, if he's what are his grades, sending to the parents' mobile, like in a few minutes. So if the kid comes home and he gets a C, I don't need, Mom, look, I had a, no, I know you've got a C. Why did you get a C? I mean, so that's also, and that's again, data from the educational sphere moving to the home sphere in a minute, right? And of course, data breach that will happen in Israel, I will move on. So the public sphere, which is public, but as we know, kids also use the public sphere. Hey, that's a big thing. We want them to use the public sphere. Kids, go out. Don't use the Xbox. Go and play with your friends outside. Go play ball. Great. What happens there? There we can see we have, again, state authorities using, for example, CCTV cameras, especially in places where children are being, right? Those parks and kindergarten places and stuff like that, because we want to protect them. By the way, no doubt, okay, child protection, sense of security, sure, but we need to understand that happens. And of course, smart cities. I don't know if you talked about it yet, I don't think we mentioned it, but smart cities, okay, everything is going to be online, right? And everything and everyone, including children. But that's the state. Parents, we talked about parents at home, we talked about the connection with the school, but let's talk about the public sphere. Now we have technological measure to track geographical location of children. Tracking apps on their phones. Parents know exactly where the children are in any time of day when they're outside. Wearables collect data about children such as location, health indicators, etc. So when children are outside, data comes to their kids, to their homes, homesphere and whatever, you understand the idea. Also private cooperation that use CCTV on private areas. And by the way, an Israel example, an insurance company who insures young drivers at the age of 16, right? And parents who want to save money, because the car is the parents' car, right? So they have like a special apps that when the child is driving the car, you know exactly the start, when he started driving, when the end of the driving, I mean the time, you know exactly where he went, where he drive. And I remember me driving in the age of 16 to my girlfriend. I said, I'm sure I want my parents to know that right now, right? So, but this is what happens. Again, it's a bit old. 16% of parents say that they use teen location with to track. But again, today I think the numbers are higher. Do you know this? Lives 360. That's a very famous app. It's at least in Israel, but I think worldwide. Track your family with Live 60. Everybody in the family have 360 app, and you can have a GPS location where the kids is on time. Everywhere you can see the map there, and etc. And those are the smart watches, right? The kids. This from a commercial, of course. So you have like the smart locator, safe zone when the kids enter school, enter the kindergarten. SOS, take me home, which is again, I perfectly understand it. I mean, you want to protect your kid, really, I do, I get it. But again, it means that we know where they are in every moment. The parents know, and the corporation, the private corporation who operate this device. And by the way, talking about safe zone, if the school is a safe zone and the kindergarten is a safe zone, what does it mean about the other places? They are not safe, right? The outside is good, it's bad, right? I mean, this is something we sell to parents, right? Everything is scary. We want to protect your kid. Buy my smartwatch. Yeah, that's the idea. And of course, the online world, this is easy because everybody here knows that, but parents monitor what their children are doing online. They have special apps for that, Google Family, whatever. They know where their parents are, the website they are on, what they are writing on WhatsApp or SMS messages. Private companies, of course, Facebook of the world, on social media, website designed for kids. For example, YouTube, we talked about it. They are on YouTube, so Google, collect the data. Apps, web gaming, we talked about it. And state authorities, I don't know if you have it here, but in Israel, we have the 105. You heard about it, the 105? Let's see if I wrote it here, because I don't want to be mistaken. Okay, I will get it in a second. Those are like, again, data from parents. 61% say they checked which website their teen visits or their social media profile. And I don't know if the teenagers still here or the were teenagers. Parents are doing it in high numbers now, more than only 60%. This is the 105. It's a program that operates under the authority of the Ministry of Public Security in Israel, in Israeli police. The main goal of the program is to assist in case of violence and crime against children on the internet. But as part of the service, 105 officials monitor children activity online, on open source, on social media and stuff like that. I mean, they're sitting on the net, okay, wanting to protect kids, but it means that the state is there. And those are examples for private companies. You heard about it. TikTok, Musical.ly, 5.7 million over alleged children privacy law violation, the COPPA, the American law. There is a lawsuit against Disney. 42 of Disney apps made for children allegedly being collected personal information and sharing the data. And the latest, Google will pay $170 million for YouTube child privacy violation, which means, yeah, the big companies are there, they're collecting data. And I'm ahead of myself here, but I'm going to say that COPPA violation here, I assuming you know what is COPPA, so I'm doing it quickly, but the idea here was that they just didn't inform parents as they should. Okay, so this is why those, generally speaking, you didn't get a parent consent, and because of that, the data collection was illegal, generally speaking. But that means that if parents give the consent, well, All hell break loose. Okay. That was pretty fast, I hope, because I know I have limited time and Michael is here. You have to remember is the chair and my supervisor. There are two hats there. Yeah. So the two main conclusions can be drawn from that we just saw. One, that technological development bring about a considerable reduction in private space available to children in every major sphere of their lives, and that different entities have different interests. Parents want to protect, corporations want money, and whatever. The second is that the reduction in travel and private space occurs not only with what happens in every sphere, but because of the collapse of boundaries, between those spaces. In the past, parental monitoring was primarily conducted in the home sphere. Today, parents can track their children and monitor their behavior even when they are in school or in the public sphere. Private corporations and schools officials can track children and collect data regarding them even when they are at their private home. Data about children's behavior in the educational sphere is transmitted and sent to parents via the net, and parents share data from the home sphere to the online world and whatever. So we see the collapse of boundaries. And if in the past we can imagine the home sphere, the public sphere, the educational sphere, and there wasn't really much of an overlap between them, you can find privacy between those dead places. That's, for example, the Handmaid's Tale. I know it's well familiar. So where is it? I just wrote it because I didn't want to. Where is it? Oh, yeah, Shelford, yeah, exactly, thank you. When it was impossible for Offred and Offglen to talk in the home sphere, they used the public sphere to, have a private talk. Sonia Livingstone showed the children, when they take a walk from school to their home, they take the long tour, because they have time to talk between the education sphere and the home sphere. And today it looks more like this, right? I mean, the overlap of spheres. And when you have this overlaps of sphere, or if you want, the collapse of boundaries, then it's harder to find privacy and private space. Now, a kid living in a smart home, living in a smart city, going to a smart school, everything is very smart. But let's talk about privacy. That's a different question. And Andrew Lefebvre talked about, how space is designed. Someone have an interest that the space looks like it is. So what's your problem? Because until now, I said, well, okay, that's the reality. I don't know if I have a lot of time, but the problem here is there are many problems, and we talked about it. That the stranger danger. When I upload picture about my kid, a pedophile can track it, or profiling. Google will make money and whatever. But I'm more concerned about the development difficulties, and I think that's when you talked about it before. I think you explained it exactly. What we know about autonomy, independence, and self-reliance. Kids need, or teenagers, but children need privacy to develop, to practice their autonomy and self-reliance. And if you don't have private space for kids, it will be harder for them to develop their sense of autonomy. Intimate relationship. Children need to talk with each other. This self-disclosure, it's very important psychologically for kids. Because, especially for teenagers, because when you share information and you see that your friend is seeing you in the way you see yourself, it gives you an approval, a social approval that you are who you are. And we need to understand that, again, it's relevant also for us as grown-ups, but teenagers, the idea of the identity search, is such an important development stage, and without privacy, it's harder to do. David Elkind, the adolescent egocentry, talked about how teenagers think that their surrounding, the grown-ups are looking at them in a crooked way. I mean, the teenagers, the teenagers feel like everything, is like, okay, they're looking at me, It's not really like that, but that's the way I see the world. And again, private space gives them a place to hide from that look. If you don't have private space, you can't achieve that. Trust. How can you build trust? trust build, the idea that I can trust someone and how I can give trust to other is such an important procedure. And if I have a camera above my head, or if I know that everything I'm writing, someone is watching, so how can I really build trust? I mean, if I'm a parent saying, I trust you, my dear boy, but I can see where you're going, I know what you're writing, and who you're meeting, is it trust? And if it's not trust, how can we ask them to know what it's trust, okay, when there will be grown-ups? Moral judgment, again, based on John Piaget writing, talks about that when you're a teenager, not when you're small, but when you're a teenager, your moral judgment comes from the idea of respect, from the inside, if you like. And if you build your moral judgment according to what others sees all the time regarding you, then you won't develop your moral judgment. You just be afraid of what others are seeing. And then we need to ask ourselves, if kids are being educated to be moral because of cameras above their head, how do they will react if, from some reason, cameras won't work anymore? Okay? Self-presentation, the idea that I want to present myself in a way that I want to present myself to the world. And that could be also a problem. But the last thing is the development of personal self-identity. Erickson theory, he talks about identity crisis. Teenagers need to have identity crisis. They need to look and to understand who they are. And by doing that, they're looking for new identities, new roles, you know, trying to find what's suitable to them. A child born today will grow up with no conception of privacy at all. They will never know what it means to have a private moment to themselves, an unrecorded, unanalyzed thought. That's a problem because privacy matters. Privacy is what allows us to determine who we are and who we want to be. The idea that I want to build my identity without privacy, I won't be able to do so. That's Edward Snowden. How much time I left? Sorry, 25 minutes. Well, I will end at that. I think that Foucault meets Erickson. He talked about the panopticon and the idea that if I'm in the panopticon, I will act in the end of the day like I think people are, the viewers want me to act. So if I combine those two theories, it means that teenagers won't have their own identity crisis. They will develop as they think people who are viewing them wants them to develop. And that comes to the normalization of the citizens of tomorrow. And the law, I will just do it shortly. There is something to be done. French parents could face prison for posting photos on their child on Facebook. That's in France. In Italy, mom faced 10,000 euro fine if she shared pictures on her son on Facebook, according to a lawsuit. The child sued her. And Germany bans smartwatches aimed to kids, tell parents to destroy the device, and they bans also talking dolls. So if you're talking about the law, if we understand, and that's I'm ending here, my argument here is that the law needs to see that in a holistic point of view. We can't only look at the COPPA saying data protection online. Okay, that's the COPPA. Or GDPR, which deals a lot with the online world. No, we need to understand it's the thing from a wide perspective, and to see that everything according to as I said before, the overlapping of space leads us to a future with kids won't have private space to develop their own identity. And if this is the problem, then the law needs to act, the regulators needs to act and think how they help kids use or develop or protect their private space in that very complex reality. Thank you for your time.
Well, that was all very depressing.
Happy to help.
But I have some faith in humans, and I've heard anecdotally that children do various things online to sort of throw parents off their trail, tell false information, that sort of thing. In your experience and your researches, how widespread is it that children take proactive stands in protecting their privacy, such as VPNs or false pages on Facebook and those sort of thing, and how effective is it?
That's a great question. Thank you for that. I interviewed teenagers in Israel from the age of 12 to 18, and I found a little resistance. Okay. First of all, regarding the private corporation, the state, they don't think about it at all. They see privacy as social. I think we discussed it before. They care about their parents. They care about their friends. They care about their teachers. State and all those. I mean, so if you don't think about it, they don't act in a way to protect their privacy from those companies, etc. They don't think about the small doors and all those stuff from my research. And regarding parents, even parents, many kids told me, that's my parents. What can I do? And if you really think about it, it's hard. I mean, what would you do? Okay, so yeah, I can, I will, we can think about stuff, but it's hard. And I don't know if it's a cultural thing. Maybe in Australia it's different. But in Israel, I found that in many cases, children accept this reality. And we need to understand that's a normalize of civilians, right? If you understand that everything, that's the way the world works, so we can't accept them or expect to act against that. They really. You talked about schools. They see it at their schools. They have CCTV. Everybody knows everything. So okay, so we have it also at home, and we don't think about Facebook at all in that perspective. So it's a romantic view. I'm not sure that it really we can rely on that. I would say that we need to educate, no doubt. You talked about education before, right? And you were criticism about it. We need to educate kids for privacy. That's a big thing. We need to talk to those private companies. That's a big thing. But we also, if the law needs all the regulators needs to do also his part in that perspective, and help kids gain their private space.
I want to pick up on your last point. But also to draw on kind of what is the main theme of this panel, and that is the intermediation. And you mostly talked about the intermediation of technology and how technology interferes with within the interpersonal relationship between the school, the teacher, and the pupils, or the parents and the children. But your last slide is about the intervention of the law in this interpersonal relationship. So if we think that a good relationship is of being able to communicate children and parents, pupils and teachers, is this a good solution? Having the state, having the law intervene in something that perhaps needed to be delegated interpersonally?
So again, great question. Thank you. Yeah, we need to be careful, with using the law inside, really relationship between parents and kids. Of course, that's in the general perspective. First of all, the law does interfere regarding, for example, violence, parents' violence against their kids. It's illegal in Israel. Now I heard it's South Africa. You heard about it? Said it's unconstitutional for parents to use force against their kids for educational means. I don't know how is it in Australia, but so the law, is there already. But if you saw here, in many ways, the law, you use the law to educate parents. I'm not talking about, using the law to, put parents behind jail. And that's a bad solution. But the law, as our lawyers know, has also an educational perspective. How do you function? And so we need to understand that the private companies, are one factor, the parents are another. So the law needs to use his ability to, in that sense, educate parents. And if you ask me, I will say my opinion. I don't think any of those examples that just shown are prohibited. I mean, you can't use them ever. No. But if you're talking about, if you're coming from human rights perspective, and you see children privacy as a fundamental right that also applied on children, so your conclusion should be that parent can track their kids or monitor them, etc., but not as a starting point. You know, not in the regular situation. If you believe there is a problem, you try to talk with your kid. You fear for his life, or something happened before you fear for his life, then you can, you can do all sort of things. But my fear here is that because you normalize all this reality, then that will be the normal situation, right? And we see now the parents upload pictures of their kids, you know, before they are born, you know, when you're pregnant, right? It starts from there. The how do you call it? It's you know, ultrasound pictures. Thank you. So it started from there, right? And you started with the baby sense, which we all have. And again, it's not prohibited, but if you see it from that perspective, then that's a problem. And in here we need to think how we can address that. I answered you? Okay, hopefully. Okay. We can continue later.
Okay, so thank you so much, Sunny.
Thank you.